Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make minimal tech house in the style of MUSE, like Cruz and Eddy, sort of that deeper style, a little bit more simple, but as you're going to see here, it's going to be a lot of different layers that are going to make it sound really complex and interesting. As usual, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI presets, everything that you just heard in the intro is available at the top of the description on my website and on my Bandcamp for just $5. It's a really great way to support me if you guys enjoyed these videos, so definitely go pick that up. And let's dive in. Alright, so right off the bat, we're at 127 BPM, and you'll notice there's not really much, there's really no grouping. There's very little processing on a lot of these elements here. And something that I want to preface with before we start this video is, if you're coming to this video looking for like the perfect kick processing or like whatever, like this style of music isn't really about that. Now, don't get me wrong, you still have to have a fat kick, you still have to have a really good sounding kick and all that kind of stuff, but it's not about like, oh, here's this magical saturation chain with this perfect compression that's going to make my kick and bass line sound better. Instead, this style of house is really more about just literally what's on the paper. Like, if you have a good bass line and a good kick side by side, you're not even going to be concerned with how saturated your kick is because it's just a good sound, you know what I mean? And that's really more what this style is about. It's about finding really good sounds and finding things that just kind of stand on their own 2 feet rather than having to go and kind of prop it up, essentially. So the first sound that we have here is the bass. So you can hear it's a really simple bass line, kind of similar to recent tracks you may have heard. So this is in the key of E minor, and we're using 3 really simple voices. As you can see, we're mostly hearing E. Of course, you want to use your root note the most, but we're also using the minor third here, and then this voice, which is actually the 5th. So if you look at this, you can see it's just an E minor chord, right? E, G, and B. But we just put that B down an octave, so you get kind of like this nice groove with that. And then it's really just about like knowing how to create that groove, right? Like, for example, having dun dun, but then this one is da da da. And then here, because we've already heard so many notes there, just having that one really open note, like knowing how to create that essentially. Versus like being like, okay, we have to put in as many notes as possible here, and now all of a sudden you can see like that's too much. So it's really creating the groove is about obviously like kind of understanding rhythms and stuff, but it's also just about knowing like where to not put notes as much as it is about where to put notes. You also notice I have this groove on here, this logic swing. That just kind of makes everything in the whole project file sort of fit under the same groove, so that we're not like if I did this by hand, like I can take all these 16th notes and swing them just really easily like that. But then the problem is that then if I do that same thing on the percussion, like it's going to be a millisecond off from this one, and by the end of the track it can sound like a mess. This way, everything's going to be on the same groove, so that all the swung 16th notes are going to be in exactly the same place, and it'll be a lot cleaner. So for the bass sound, it's made with 2 layers. So we have like a sub bass, and then this bass on top, which is just adding a bit of punch. The sub bass is made with operator, and it's just a pretty simple FM patch. You can see we have a sine wave, another sine wave, and then you guessed it, a third sine wave. Now the secret to this one that really makes it sound deep is that it's actually playing in a higher octave than I would normally want to put the bass, but because we've done this with the FM, where you take the chorus pitch of the second one an octave down from the first one, which typically what you would want to do is you would have your first oscillator, and then everything that's FMing that, you'd want to put at like a higher octave. But because we put this at a lower octave, here's what it sounds like 1 octave up. You can see it's not as deep. And then at the lower octave, you can hear it adds in that fullness. So it's a really great little secret there to make these kinds of basses. And the certain one here is really just for the punch. Here's without it. And then with it, you can hear just having that short envelope on there. It's a really interesting way to just add a little like onto your sound. And then we just have a compressor side chaining that to the kick. And then for the second bass, it's also made with operator. Now, all this one is just a saw wave with a low pass, which has an envelope, of course, to give it more like punch and make it pop a little bit more. And then it's being sidechained, and then I have a high pass filter. And this is really just to add that kind of mid-range harmonic content onto the bass, right? It's really meant to sound like it's just one bass that's really full. Then we have our kick. Now, like I said, kick is completely dry. You know, it's just a nice, fat, punchy kick. Now, if I play the original sample here, you'll notice it's a little bit different, right? The original sample is a lot kind of more open. It's a bit too open. Like, it just feels too, like, boom, you know? So what I did here is I actually went and turned down the low-pass filter, and then I brought in the filter envelopes. This is working the exact same way as, like, that filter envelope worked on the bass, for example. But now it's on the kick. And what you can do is you can use this, and it'll actually add a lot of nice punch onto your kick. So here's without the filter, and then with it. And essentially what's happening is we're just getting the high end for like the very start of the note, right? And then it quickly goes down. So it's removing all that from the sound, but it's not getting rid of the like click at the start. And it makes the kick feel deeper. But what this also does is it preserves the kicks. Because a lot of times I think people want to do this way, right? Like, okay, we don't want like the tail of the kick, so let's just shorten the amplitude envelope. The problem with that though is, okay, fine, we can do that. But now all that bass and kind of like fullness of the kick is missing. So doing it this way still gets rid of that stuff that you don't want, because we're not getting those like mid-range and higher frequencies and like the tail of the kick, but it preserves the length of the kick while still making the kick a lot deeper. And really, like, your kick sound is going to make a big difference in your groove here. Like, of course, the kick is always just doom, 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 doom. But switching between different kicks, you'll see what I mean. It can completely change the groove. So, like, you really want to take your time and dial this in and just make sure it's the right length. So you'll still get this super bouncy kind of groove here. And then we have these hi-hats. So as you can hear, just between these 4 layers, there's a lot of movement. Of course, we have like our main one. So it's just this mid-range hi-hat layered with this open one. Kind of getting the best of both worlds there. But then you'll notice, like, with this shaker and this background hi-hat, they're kind of like talking to each other, right? Like, we get the call here, and then the response, and then the call here, and then the response. So it's kind of like creating that relationship between those 2 hi-hats adds a lot of depth to the overall sound. And that's what I was talking about, where it's like, again, it's about what's on the paper. It's not about drawing something on the paper and then embellishing it in the computer. It's about the raw information that's there, and like, you know, how good can you make 4 hi-hats sound, essentially? And like, what can we explore within that framework of like just having a few different sounds here that are kind of similar, but still making them like very exciting? And it all comes down to, again, like call and response, like having things talk to each other, and also spacing it out as well. For example, I could have had it go, but that doesn't really have as much of a groove as. So it's just kind of keeping that in mind. Then we have our clap / snare. And so, yeah, this is a pretty standard sort of thing. So just a clap, layered with this nice punchy snare. And the idea here is that really, like, it's going to hit pretty much the same as the clap. But I've noticed that these guys do this a lot in their tracks. And it just gives their track a little bit more of a unique feel because of course not every house track has a snare on the 2 and 4. Yeah, usually it's just a clap. But the other thing is that it's going to impact the groove. It's like I said, all these individual sounds, like it's just like with the kick, where like the sample that you use for the clap can drastically change your groove. So having like this harder hitting like clap snare here, rather than just a little, like if we take it to just a clap, it's not quite as punchy anymore. You don't bob your head as much. So it's these little things that set up the groove. Then we have all of these little percussions, which kind of all fit into the same group, but you can see it's a ton of them. It's literally like 10 or 11 layers here. And so the thing about these is obviously, like, it's pretty much going to be something in every single 16th note, right? Like, throughout your track, you're constantly going to have a of some sort going on in the background. But then what creates the nuance and what creates the groove here is essentially, like, how different sounds are louder. Maybe one sound is a little bit punchier. Maybe one sound is a little bit quieter. So then that's what's going to essentially create your groove. Like we have this going in the background constantly, but it's a tiny sound. So then, when this note doubles it up, it makes that more impactful. And that's what's creating your groove here. Again, like, I think to just go and get, like, one or two little sounds isn't really the case, isn't really going to sound that good. What you want to do is, you're really going to have to fill it up like this, like, 7, 8, 9, 10, in this case it's 11 layers. And then just like I said, like, knowing how to work with the different layers and understanding that the groove is entirely based on how loud the sound is, how hard it's hitting, all that kind of stuff. And, like, okay, for example, like here, I want to have a so we use this one there, which is, like, very impactful. So then when that goes into the clap and snare, it's going to work really well. And then here, like, we just use that shaker. And it's still something constantly, but it's because it's not the same sound. That's the nuance, and that's what's creating the groove there. And obviously, I could sit here and show you all the individual MIDI for all of these, but the truth is that it really doesn't matter because it's gonna be different every single time. Obviously, okay, yeah, like, you're gonna work 16th notes. I have the swing on all of these, but it's really about, like, listening to your groove and just go bar, even, like, quarter note by quarter note. Just go like that a bunch of times and just listen to each one. You can see there's little details in each quarter note here that's kind of building up the groove, and then you get to a point where you have 2 bars, right? So then maybe you've done all of these quarter notes, you've got something happening constantly, then you just duplicate that. But then the second time, that's where you go and change it a little bit. Like, you can see I have, like, a few different things in the second half here, and then, like, over here it changes even more. Then we start to introduce some new stuff down here. So it's like, just having that, like, really tight groove where you're really, like, every 16th note is accounted for, and you're following it bar by bar to make sure that everything is very full. And then duplicating that and making little variations. And that's essentially how this kind of track is going to work, right? And you can also see there's little call and response grooves happening in here as well. I think that's really important. For example, like, a really basic one would be like these two, where at the end of every 2 bars you have this, or every bar. And then on the last one, at the end of 4 bars, you get that, like, harder snare there. Or, like, these two are kind of playing off of each other. And even with that one. And you'll see what I mean, like, as you get in here, and you start building up, like, okay, so you maybe make one group that's, like, 2 little percussions bouncing off of each other. Then you have that. Then you look for, like, 3 more percussions, and then you make those bounce off of each other. And then as you start to add up these layers, that's going to create the groove there. And that's also another thing of, like, when you try to do this with, like, 1 or 2 or 3 sounds, that's why it never quite gets to that level, is because it's this much complexity happening to make it work. And it's minimal house, yes, but obviously, like, it's not about being minimal, just being, like, less. It's about kind of finding a lot within a little, essentially. And then down here we have all these little sounds, which are just kind of like the extra sort of musical sounds. Like, we have a vocal, some nice and deep minimal stabs. I added that little zap in there in the second half there, like, just little stuff to kind of make this a little bit more exciting and just kind of mix it up. Obviously, if we just take the same 4 bars and loop it over and over, like, it's gonna get kind of boring. So just having that little zap there. And these are all just like audio stabs. Just finding like a good sample, something with a lot of character to it. and I'm just kind of putting it in and making interesting stuff. Like, playing with the octaves can make these sound really cool, like doing that dun-dun-dun. But these are going to be pretty dry. You really don't want too much like reverb or delay on these, because it can really kind of get in the way of everything else. And obviously having like some type of a catchy vocal in your track can make it really memorable as well. And yeah. So, if you follow all the steps, you should be able to make a track in this style. You know, again, like, it can seem kind of simple, but as you can see, when you're actually going to do it, it's pretty challenging, and there's a lot going on there, and it's a lot, you know, kind of working with nuance and subtle details, rather than big, huge sounds that are just going to constantly be grabbing you, but kind of grabbing people's attention with simpler stuff like this. So yeah, that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full project file, samples, the MIDI, the presets. Every single thing that you just saw me break down is available at the top of the description for just $5. Definitely go pick that up so you can follow along. Plus, you get a bunch of great samples, and it really helps support me. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video.